All right. Well, today's reading comes again from the Gospel of Matthew. We are continuing in a long passage that we have been working with for Matthew. Hear now this reading. Then the Pharisees went and plotted to entrap him in what he said. So they sent their disciples to him, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, we know that you are sincere and teach the way of God in accordance to the truth, and show deference to no one, for you do not regard people with partiality. Tell us then what you think. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor or not?" But Jesus, aware of their malice, said, "Why are you putting me to the test, you hypocrites? Show me the coin used for the tax." And they brought him a denarius. Then he said to them, "Whose head is this, and whose title?" They answered, "The emperor's." Then he said to them, "Give therefore to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's." When they heard this, they were amazed, and they left him and went away. This is the word of God for the people of God this day. Let us pray. God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, our rock and our redeemer. Amen. Got to sort out all my slug pictures up here. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you all for your prayers. As you may know, I've been gone for 2 weeks doing cross-continental weddings. I did one in West Virginia and then the same couple again in Wales so that they could each be with their family. And it was a wonderful time, and I really appreciate your prayers for a toddler on a plane for 7 hours both ways. We needed every prayer, so thank you. We survived. Also, I want to say that if you have a phone that has a camera on it with you, I invite you to have it ready for a part during the sermon, though please make sure that it is on a quiet mode. So I'll let you know when it's time. So this passage of Jesus talking about the tax, I'm not sure if it's intended by the writers who chose the lectionary and who pick which readings we're going to do each week. But it always comes up in October. It always comes up when we're doing our stewardship theme. And it comes up when we have to talk about that really difficult subject of money. And I think it's helpful because, frankly, your preachers really don't like to talk about money all that often because it's complex. It's full of really difficult things. And so I appreciate that we're sort of given this prompt to think about it. The context that you should know of where Jesus is, we are in the middle, strangely, of Holy Week in this passage. So we're like ripped out of context a little bit, but you can imagine that Jesus has come triumphantly in on his donkey, and he's gone into the temple and he has overturned the tables. And this is key to the story, because the reason that Jesus overturns the tables is that they are unethical and immoral, according to what he's saying. In that time, as you heard in the story, the Roman coins had the face of Tiberius Caesar, the Emperor Tiberius, on them, and it claimed that he was the Son of God, the divine Son. And on the flip side of it, it said he was the high priest. So these, as you might imagine, were literally graven images of a god that was not the Hebrew God. And so they were verboten in the temple. So you couldn't bring the Roman coin in there. So they had this little nice setup where you could go and you could change your Roman coins in for temple coins, and they would be an appropriate way to give your offering. Only there was kind of an extra charge added. There was a little bit of exchange. If you've ever been to one of those currency exchanges in an airport, somehow it's not the same exchange as you might see on like Google's exchange rate. So, they were getting a little extra out of that, which is what got Jesus pretty mad enough to turn over those tables. So that's your background. And this was enough of an upsetting moment that it got two very opposite teams together, the Pharisees, who were like the reformers, and the Herodians, who were loyal to Rome. This was like Bernie Sanders and Mitch McConnell saying, let's get this guy together. So they get together, and they decide that Jesus has got to go. And so they pose him this test. And it's a test because they know that if Jesus says, don't pay the tax, then Rome is going to be pretty upset. And if he says, do pay the tax, then the reformers are going to be upset. So they know that he can't win in this situation. But Jesus does what a wise spiritual leader does and asks a question in response. And it's a question that leads to great moral thinking from that time until today. One of the things he does in his answer is first he says, they're in the temple, right? So he says, tell me what coin is used. And the Pharisees, who are really into not using the Roman coins in the temple, pull out a denarius. So this is already a big deal. They have the forbidden coin in the temple. Hypocrisy number one. And then he challenges them to think about how that coin is used. This coin represents in their hands a violation of both the first and second commandments. There have no other gods other than me, and do not make graven images of other gods. And so he gets them humble, as we all often need. And then he asks the big question: what of our lives bears the image of empire? And what bears the image of God? When we think about the resources that we use, I check through all of my American cash. I still have some British cash, but I check through the American cash, and it all says, in God we trust. But the images on there are patriotic images of the United States. And it made me think about how all of us, as we are going through life, are sort of walking this muddy ground of being impressed upon both in an image of empire and also in an image of God. But I think what Jesus does is to challenge people to think about what that greater image is. And so this is where your cell phones come in. So I would like you each to take one out if you have it, if it has a camera on it, and turn it to selfie mode. I'll give you a minute. Give myself a minute too. Okay, and now, you get your best angle up this way, right? Yeah, totally. Okay, all right, give your best smile and take a photo. You now have the image of God on your phone. It's not graven, it's digital, so, it's okay. Now, if you had, like me, some other folks photobombing you, you may have other images of God on there. But if you also have a camera, switch it back out of selfie mode, if you can, and take a picture of your neighbor. Your phone is now full of images of God, because in every face that we greet and meet, we are meeting what we are told in Genesis is God's very intention in creation, to create images of God in all of the people. And so what Jesus challenges us to do is to really think about that. Maybe our money belongs to the empire, belongs to the government, issued by the government, maybe so. And maybe it needs to go back to that in some ways. But what is much bigger is the coin that we carry of ourselves, the coin that we can decide what to do with as we go through life. We have a chance to put it in the hands of Caesar, to put it in the making of money at the expense of all humanity. Or we have a chance to put it in God's work, to do the things that we light the justice candle about, to speak up for those who are poor or downtrodden, to share a meal with those who might be alone, to give a prayer when someone is hurting. We have the chance every single day to pay back to God what has been given to us. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about stewardship. If you're not familiar with the church lingo, the reason we use the word stewardship is it reminds us that God has called us to be caretakers or stewards of all that God has given. God doesn't actually give us ownership, but instead the responsibility to care. And so in stewardship, we have to really think about what we do with our whole selves, including the money and the resources that we have been given. And we talk about this specifically at this time of year in the church because this is the time that we make plans for next year, that we're putting the budget together and we're asking you to very carefully consider what you may have of your resources. And that includes money, but it also includes time and talent and all the things that you bring in your whole beautiful coin of yourself. And there are many, many ways that you can put that coin into the use of God. Why would you do it here? Why would you do it at Union Church? I think this brings me back, at least, to reflections about Moses, who was the founder of our faith, the one who talked more with God than anyone else, except for maybe Jesus, but that's confusing because Son of God, but also God. And yeah, we're going to let that go and go with Moses being the one who's talking to God. So in this passage, Moses and God are having the DTR, which is a slang word for defining the relationship talk. So they're deciding, okay, we're going to be exclusive. What does that mean? And on God's side, that means, okay, no more idols. You can't be going around and visiting with other idols, all right? It's got to be only me. And on Moses' side, it's, you've got to stay with us. You've got to go wherever we go and face whatever we face. And in this negotiation, Moses gets that promise out of God. He gets that promise of Emmanuel, God with us. I will go with you. And then he goes one step further, and he says, okay, so let me see your full glory. No. No. In a lot of clergy circles, we joke about how this is the point in which God shows Moses God's best side, the back. You can presume from there. But I read a commentator who had a slightly different take, and this is where I got the whole slug idea, that we don't get to see God's back so much as where God has been. And I feel like that provides some relief. Now, maybe Moses did actually get to see God's back, but I think most of us only get to see that sort of glittery trail of where God has been. And it's kind of a relief to me that no one really gets to see God fully. It sort of makes me feel better, right? You're welcome to feel better with that too. But it also made me think about our experience. A whole bunch of us from Union Church this year went to see the solar eclipse. We've got the banner that we brought back to prove it up there. And if you got to see the solar eclipse, you'll remember that there was this whole feeling of like, okay, you can't look, it's too bright, it will blind you. If you look, don't look, until you're really in a dark place. Until it's as dark as it's gonna get. And then you get to look, and you see not the whole sun, but you see the flares of the sun. You see the glimpses of what is happening in this giant, amazing star. So it gets dark and cold and eerie, and now, look. And it's beautiful. It's amazing. It's one of the greatest moments of getting to glimpse the universe. And I think a lot of the ways that we see where God has been is like that image of the corona flares. It's like people who are visited in the hospital, or artwork created by divine inspiration, or laughter and hugs in hard times. It's people walking with one another in dark times, or receiving financial assistance when they don't know what else to do, or coming to worship to have their spirits lifted through singing, through music, through maybe an occasional good sermon. The solar eclipse didn't last for more than 2.5 minutes, and that was the longest anybody got to see it. And I think in a lot of ways, following God is like that. We get these glimpses of the corona. We get these glimpses of a glittering trail. And the rest of the time, we're following in faith that that glimpse is something real and true, that one day we will see more, that one day we will know more. And faith means constantly remembering and reminding each other. It's what we do in communion. We break the bread and we remember. Not only did Jesus die, but Jesus rose. We remember that death does not have the final victory, but life does. And communities of faith do this for each other. They hold out that memory for one another in the dark times. From Moses on, from the Passover, where they proclaimed God's love for the Israelites in the midst of slavery and kept them going through exile and horrible events. And in Jesus' resurrection, we have an even more powerful testimony of life conquering death. All these things the church lifts up and is charged with holding and sharing for all those who are in the dark clefts. For generations, that faith has been passed down. But an interesting thing you may know is happening in our culture now, which is that a whole bunch of people left the church. And that was right about the time that the baby boomers were coming in of age, and the Gen Xers and the millennials and everybody behind did not get a lot of that faith transmitted. Now, of course, there are many exceptions. Many of us present here are part of that exception. But it is a trend throughout all of Christendom right now that things like people giving to the church are not happening anymore. My wife, Les, was the treasurer at our last church, and she said it was really marked. You could see the generational divide between people who knew, because their parents had taught them and their parents had taught them, that you had to give in order to hold that faith out for when you needed it or when somebody else needed it. And so those of us in these lost generations, lost, so to speak, I don't think we're really lost, but those of us who are in these other generations have to learn in a new way, and I'm part of that. It's been a huge learning process for me, and partly because my salary comes through that process. I have taken great interest in it. But it is a huge learning process for me in what it takes to create this faith community. It takes the salaries of the people who do the visiting and the preparing and the planning and the leading. It takes the building with the heat and the AC and the sound and the lights. It takes money to advertise and computers and printers to print your giant worship bulletin. It takes all of us sacrificing what was never really ours alone so that we might share the good news with God's people. And it takes the faith that if we share, and this is the hard part still for me, it takes the faith that if we give, we too will be held in that safety net. We too will see that corona, that glimpse of God. It takes faith that God promises to be with us as we care for one another. And so over the course of this week, you will get, if you're a member or a regular participant, you will get a letter asking you to think about what you might pledge. And I would encourage you to think about it not so much as like what percentage of my income am I giving, although that can be an interesting challenge, but what can you give to help other people glimpse God's good news? What can you give to share what God has done for you and for others with the world? Giving is a response of gratitude and faith in our actions, our gifts, and our service to others. And the wonderful thing about church is that we don't do this alone. We don't just sit at home and send a check and hope that it goes somewhere. We come to this place. We greet the hearts. We see the images of God in all the people around us. We stand for and with each other in good times and bad times, even when we are hidden in a cleft of darkness. Here we stand, Union Church. We are called to life. We are called to abundant justice and joy and compassion and peace. Here we stand, made in God's image, born forth by God going ahead of us, walking faithfully in the knowledge that we too can go forward in God's presence. Here we stand bearing witness to the slug trail, shining light on its glitter, showing others the way. Here we stand, holding in our hearts the beauty of the corona glimpsed in the darkness. Here we stand, giving back to God's use what we've been given and sharing the good news with all. Here we stand in the image and the presence of God. Amen.
As Reverend Rachel said, we do not stand alone. We stand with partners. We stand for and with those who are seeking to build the kingdom of God, and literally building that kingdom is Habitat for Humanity. Union Church has been a strong, blessed partner. We have received so much more than we have ever given, and we've invited Russ Barkley, who is the current director of Madison County and Clark County Habitat for Humanity, to speak a little bit about what we believe.
Morning. And much like that slug trail, we stand together in covenant with one another for the past 25 years. I think Reverend Kent reminded me of that 2 weeks ago when he spoke and opened up our breakfast with prayer. And we are thankful for that covenant relationship with Union Church. And looking at that slug trail, being able to see a beautiful community such as Hope Estates just down the road, or the homes that we built during the Jimmy Carter Work project together over on Loxton Heights, and the homes that you see down in Old Town. There is evidence of the goodness of God and the goodness of Union Church in partnership with Habitat here in Berea. And so I want to thank you all for that, first and foremost. Also, I just wanted to offer another image today, and that being particularly thinking about rendering unto Caesar what is Caesar's and rendering unto God what is God's, and who we are, made in the image of God. And so one of the images I would like to present to you is that of the bent nail. And I shared this at our breakfast a couple of weeks ago. I started working with Habitat for Humanity in Jackson, Mississippi in the year 2000. And it was my first foray into carpentry work, but I noticed this peculiar behavior from the carpenters with Habitat for Humanity. One, as you can imagine, you get a site full of unskilled volunteers, you are going to produce a tonnage of bent nails. And actually, I'm a little bit nervous to nail anything on the door today because we might have another bent nail. But the thing I noticed in that peculiar behavior was that the Habitat carpenters didn't just throw those nails away. Instead, they would pick them up, they would pull out their hammers, they would gently reshape them, and they would use them once again to build that home, to build that community, and to build that hope. And I think that this is the work that we come into day in, day again. We took pictures of selfies and then of our neighbor. Well, in this past year at Habitat, we've had folks walk into our doors who life has bent up. I think about the 13-year-old who's told me the story about having to call Child Protective Services on her mother because of drug use. I think about the grandmother and grandchild who have for years lived in a mold-infested trailer. I think about the husband and wife who did not have a proper entrance into their home. And so anytime a guest would come over, they'd come through a side door that went right into the bedroom. These are our neighbors from Berea right here who we've come into contact with this past year. But I'm thankful that with Habitat for Humanity, with God, that we don't discard bent nails. Instead, we pull out our hammers, we gently reshape one another so that we can become really good neighbors. So that 13-year-old now can be a homeowner with her two children as they pursue their aspirations. And so that grandmother and grandchild can have a new, healthy home, and that grandmother can say that her hope and her prayer is that this home is a blessing not only for her grandchildren's grandchildren, but their grandchildren as well. And we have that husband and wife who now have a front stoop that people can enter their home into, and a small little back deck to where they can hang out, break bread together, laugh, and tell stories. And so this is the work that we've been about this past year. This is the work that you, in support of Habitat for Humanity, have helped us do. And as we look at the year ahead, we invite you in to further work. We recently were awarded a sponsorship from Thrivent Financial in their Thrivent Faith Build. And so I think 2 years ago, Union Church participated in an Apostles Build here in Berea. This next year in 2018, we're setting out to do the same thing again. And so we invite you all into partnership with us as we get ready to build another home here in this community in the hope that springs forth from that place. As we go about that build right now, we've got a family that's been identified. She's been patiently waiting for 2 years, but the biggest struggle we've had here in Berea is finding affordable land to build on. And so we ask and invite you all to help us be on the lookout for land. And one of the things I like to say is that we want to be able to transform those plots of possibility into homes of hope. And so it's that work that we ask you to join us in. And in closing, I guess I will take the Habitat mission statement. Oh, there went all the nails, I'm sorry. Seeking to put God's love into action, Habitat for Humanity brings people together to build homes, communities, and hope. And then just something for you all later. May God's love and goodness continue to flow through Union Church. Thank you all. So I went outside during the passing of the peacetime, and I brought a bent nail with me, and then I started looking at surfaces I could reshape that nail here inside, and didn't see any. So I went back outside, and as we post this mission statement, I'm going to do so with one of our bent nails, and that being as much of a proclamation as this mission statement.
May it be so. Amen.